and we begin.
Okay.
Nina, if
Good
you want.
morning, everybody. You do the intros, Jen?
Well, actually, I
Oh, is it not 10 yet?
It is, yeah, 10.
Okay.
It is 10.
Okay.
So if you want to go ahead and launch into the intros, I'll do the
The thanks. Okay.
I'll do the thanks first. So first, welcome to our first Coffee with a Writer for the spring 2022 semester. We're so glad that you can be here with us to see this or to participate in this event. But first, our CLA, Center for Literary Art events, are sponsored by the Allegany Arts Council, by the Community Trust Foundation, by the City of Frostburg, and by several offices at Frostburg State University, including the Office of the President, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the Department of English and Foreign Languages and Literature. I'd also like, because this is our first Coffee with a Writer for the spring semester, I'd also like to recognize someone whom I don't often recognize, though I am always grateful for her work, which is to recognize Nina Forsyth, who, though she is very busy as a commissioner in the city of Frostburg, she continues to be willing to, on a voluntary basis, facilitate these coffees. So Nina, we are definitely grateful for you.
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful for you too for setting everything up, and I can just step into the host chair after you prepared everything. It's a way for me to really keep my hand in the literary community, because I have not been as involved just because of things pulling me in another direction, which I'm kind of interested to hear how you do it, Guy, because you're a scientist and a researcher. And so, but let me just start a little with an intro, everybody. This is Guy Newsham, who is a scientist at Canada's National Research Centre, who specializes in energy efficiency, sustainable buildings, indoor environmental quality, and that sort of thing. He is an actor in community theater and a playwright. He has 23 plays and has won many competitions, including Frostburg's one-act playwriting competition. So welcome, Guy. You'll start with a short reading so that people can get a flavor of your work, and then we can start the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Nina. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to say that during these strange times that we're living in, these sort of online events and forums for writers, theatres that have been putting stuff online have really been a lifesaver for me during this past couple of years to stay in contact and stay active. And I applaud all the organizations that have made the effort to do that. And it's nice for me to pay that back a little bit today by being the content provider for you this morning. I'd also like to start off before I do my reading by giving a big thumbs up to Frostburg. Frostburg's was really, really important to me in the development of my writing career, if I can put it that way. In that I started writing seriously for the stage about four and a half years ago. And as with most writers, it took me about a year and a half to get my very first production, which was a 10-minute play that was done at a festival in Canada. And then in 2019, I got my second production, was another 10-minute play at that same festival. And then my third production was through the Frostburg one-act playwriting competition. That was really important to me because, first of all, it was a different format. It was a one-act, not a 10-minute play. And secondly, it was a different organization. So I could say it wasn't just the one festival in Canada that seemed to like my work. It was one other organization that validated what I was doing. And that was really important. It gave me a lot of confidence to continue. I did come down in person for the festival in 2019, and I bought the T-shirt and would have liked to have come down again if COVID had allowed in 2020. But I hope to be able to make it down again sometime in the future if I'm fortunate enough. So with that said, if you'd like me to launch into a reading that I have ready. So this was I've written mostly 10-minute plays with a couple of one acts and a couple of full lengths. And 10-minute plays appealed to me because they were much less intimidating than writing a full length. It's 8 pages, not 80. So I thought I could, this last year, I started writing something new, and I thought I could trick myself into writing a full-length play by writing a number of 10-minute plays that maybe could be done independently as valid 10-minute plays, but you could string them together and do them all in one night, and you'd end up with a full-length piece. So the concept I came up with was a number of scenes from a wedding reception. All happens on the same evening. And I wound up with 6 scenes with 6 characters. They're all two-handers. Every character gets 2 scenes, and they never get the same scene partner twice. So it actually worked out quite nicely in terms of balance. And I'm still working on dramaturging that with someone at the moment. But I thought what I'd do today is read the first scene for you, and then I guess we'll take it from there. So we have, at the beginning, we just have one line from a PA at the reception. Then we have 2 characters, a middle-aged man, Geordie, and a middle-aged woman, Claire. Okay, so let's take it from there. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for their very first dance together as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Oliveira. There she is, our little girl, a married woman. Yes, our little Tilly, or Matilda Marguerite, as Father Francis said in the ceremony. The names of both her grandmothers. My mother's name first. Remember how we fought over that? I wouldn't say fought, Claire. No, of course you wouldn't. I haven't heard her called that for years, Matilda Marguerite. She was always just Tilly to us. She looks so radiant out there, as if light is drawn to her. Yes, we got something right there. We got a lot of things right. And I like him, Tilly's beau, Bruno. I'd like him a lot better with a business degree. He'll be good for her. Yes, I hope so. I'm glad she's changed out of that wedding dress. If she tried to dance in it, the long train, you mean. She always was a bit of a klutz. She gets that from you, Geordie. Needed 2 bridesmaids just to fish that train down the aisle. A very traditional wedding, and she took his name. I would not have pegged Tilly as so old-fashioned. Traditional right down to the father of the bride paying for the whole thing. Open bar, Christ. I'm surprised you can afford it. Did my lawyer miss something? Don't worry, your lawyer was very thorough. My recent colonoscopy wasn't as thorough. But it's been 3 years now, Claire. I threw myself into my work and got a nice promotion. Congratulations. Thank you. So, who's your date? Oh, Brittany. She's great. I'll introduce you when she gets back from, well, wherever she went. Brittany. She's very attractive. Yeah, she is. She's very young. She's older than Tilly. Well, that's all right then. She and Tilly get along very well. I imagine they would. We've been together for 3 months now. Huh. I'm not sure about all her piercings. Yeah, they can get in the way. How did you 2 meet? At a speed dating thing. Speed dating? I'm surprised she'd have to go to speed dating. She went along on a dare. She dated you on a dare. I like that. And who's your date? Ron. His name's Ron. He's great too. And you met online, of course. Doesn't anyone meet the time-honored way anymore? You know, you go to a bar, you have a few drinks. Oh, I've had a few drinks during every one of my online dates. You need a few drinks just to get through them. So many drinks. You know what they say, you have to fend off, ghost, and do background checks on an awful lot of frogs before you find your prince. Your prince, Ron. Yes. And where is Ron now? He's calling the kennel, checking on his dog. Talking to his dog. His dog. Beatrice the boxer. Beatrice the boxer? I should probably go and track him down. No, we haven't finished catching up yet. Stay a minute, please. Okay. I always wanted a dog and you said you were allergic. Really? You want to do this now? What? New partner, new times, new rules of engagement. Still no Brittany. Perhaps she got lost. She probably sent me a text. I turn the alarms off. They drive me crazy. She doesn't like that. No, I don't suppose she does. What do you and Brittany talk about? What do you have in common?
Go
What
ahead
do
and join too. I'll mute my audio once you join. So it looks.
What do you have in common? What are your cultural touchstones? We have friends in common. Really? You move in the same circles? No, the TV show Friends. We have that in common. It first came out when I was her age, and now it's popular again when she's her age. You haven't thrown your love of opera at her yet? Have you thrown your love of opera at Ron? How does Brittany feel about 19th century French novelists or early German cinema? I'm sure it's all available on her iPhone. Claire, be nice. What? Remember how you and me, we'd stay up to the early hours debating whether Fritz Lang was a genius or a madman? Genius, there's no debate. Madman. Or whether it's even possible to fully grasp those French novels in translation. You don't have those midnight discussions with Ron? By 10 o'clock, Ron's in bed with the Golf Channel. And Beatrice the boxer. And Beatrice the boxer. Ron has his faults, but he's a good man, an honest man. Well, I'm sure he is. Does Brittany know about your faults? After all, it took me 3 decades to figure them out. She's only had 3 months. I've learned my lesson. If you met for the first time, you'd be very impressed. I already did meet you for the first time, Geordie, more than 30 years ago. And you were impressed then? Come on, forget about everything that's happened in between. Cast your mind back to the first night we met, the first few months, the first few years. Yes, the evidence suggests I was impressed, okay? What did you like about me? Geordie, come on. You were sincere, reliable. You were the first man I met who even knew about German cinema and liked it, and didn't just say he liked it to get me into bed. And you weren't awful to look at. You know what I liked about you? That I was different from the other girls. I was serious, I knew what I wanted, and I had a car. You remembered. Of course I remembered, Geordie, and you loved that car. And you had, still have, the most amazing eyes. Pale smoke grey, bewitching. I remember holding Tilly in my arms that first hour after she was born. Of course, we didn't call her Tilly then. No, we just called her Pink Thing for days, that fierce pink thing, and her tiny fist balled tight like she was coming to the world swinging. And I looked at you in that hospital bed and I thought you were amazing, a miracle worker. I was. You were flushed with the effort, your hair plastered to your forehead. Thank God we didn't have cell phones back then. I don't think you ever looked more beautiful. I don't think I ever loved you more than at that moment. Because every moment after that, you loved me just a little bit less. What I meant was, do you hear that? They're playing our song. Yes. Do you think Tilly picked it? Our daughter planned this wedding down to the very first detail, to the very last detail, like the furniture, the fairy lights, the design of the dessert folks. I can't imagine she'd let the DJ choose his own playlist. Smart girl, she gets that from you. Yes, she does. So she probably wants us to dance then. What do you say? Just for Tilly. I'd say, I think you should dance with your date, Geordie. Afraid you won't be able to handle my moves. Those moves have not aged well. Indulge me. No, thank you. What, you were hoping for some kind of Hollywood ending, a rom-com reconnection? I don't know what I was hoping for, to be honest. Remember, we met watching German cinema in black and white. The Germans didn't go in for tidy, happy endings. No, you're right. Okay, then. I'm off to the bar. My ex-husband's paying for everything, and I plan to take full advantage. Take care, Geordie. End scene.
Thank you. I would have enjoyed seeing that on the stage.
Well, you may get the chance, who knows?
I hope so. Gosh, so just for those who have joined, a reminder that this is a conversation. So I'll start off with some questions, but feel free to jump in with comments or questions, and it can be about particular plays, the process of playwriting, acting, staging, contests, anything like that. Even work-life balance, because you have a play about work-life balance and you have experience that I'm sure. Is that what it came out of? Just, balancing your work as a scientist and also your interest in acting and playwriting?
This particular play that I just read from, you mean?
No, you have a play about work-life balance. I can't remember what it's called now.
Oh, it was that red ink, maybe? Was that?
Yes, that one. Yes.
Yeah, that was the first full-length play that I tried to write. Okay, yes. Where did that come from? Good question. I'm trying to remember. It was quite a while ago. Yeah, I think that's true. Yes. The idea, thinking back on my own career as a scientist when I was younger, it was certainly very demanding, and to get along in that kind of career, you really have to put in a lot of extra time, extra hours, and I think looking back, other things were sacrificed, including theatre. I spent quite a while away from theatre while I was building my career, and have only been able to come back to it relatively recently. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot that gets sacrificed when you're trying to make so many different things work.
Yeah. I've been so I was looking at your page with that lists all your different plays, and I've been intrigued by like the little teasers. For example, like the first date of meeting an alien for the first time is awkward. What do you say? Or the chin up one, in the future, pandemics are frequent. So how much do you reveal on a first date? How do you I'm wondering what it is that sparks, oh, this would be a good idea for a play.
Yeah, good question. Well, first of all, the one-liner descriptions, it was suggested to me from some playwriting course or YouTube video I watched or something about writing a log line for a play in the same way that you would for a movie. So try and come up with a one-sentence description of your play, and that's kind of a good discipline, because if you can't describe it in one sentence and make it intriguing, then there's probably something wrong with the entire play. And then try and make sure that the play is consistent with that one-line description. So it's a discipline I've tried to exercise for myself and passed on to other people. I think the second part of your question is sort of the more general question of where do ideas come from, and they just they happen when they happen, I suppose. The chin up one about future pandemics, I guess I resisted writing a play about the pandemic for a long time. But finally some idea came into my head about how that might work, and rather than writing it about the current situation, imagining, I guess, what would be a nightmare scenario, which is they keep on coming, and imagining what life might be like 30 years from now if we had regular pandemics, and what that might mean for dating, in that how do you ever meet anybody? It's a question I've had during the current pandemic, but how might you ever meet anybody if pandemics were frequent and we were always wearing masks and we were always in our bubbles, and what might that mean for the human race, maybe. And then the other play that you mentioned, First Data, I guess that was again a take on another take on the dating scene, but this time with aliens. And I don't really write science fiction, but I did early in my career, I did flirt with astronomy, so it's always been an interest of mine to maybe work something in about that. So First Contact with Aliens just again popped into my head, but I don't always write about dating. You pay
I didn't even realize from the description that it was about dating. I thought it was kind of almost like, well, like a first contact story. And it's like,
it's kind of a parallel.
It provoked in me the thought that, like, what do you say? Because you can't assume any common experience.
Well, exactly.
You don't think you're going to say, like, what do you do? What's your job? Like, maybe they don't have jobs.
Yeah, so it's actually exactly that. It's kind of trying to put in the first date language, but into the first contact with another society. So asking the same kinds of questions, but obviously, as you just said, in different kinds of ways, and then also being confronted with rejection as well. So that play should get performed later this year in Florida, I hope.
Cool. There was another one that really intrigued me about like border crossing. Why don't you describe that one, because it's really intriguing.
Yeah, well, this idea came from, I wasn't thinking about theater at all when this idea popped into my head. I was reading, I forget where it was, but I was reading about, I mean, the US-Canadian border it's an interesting line. And there is this particular town in Quebec, Vermont, where the line goes right through the middle of town, right down the middle of streets. And one side of the street's Vermont, the other side is Quebec. And it actually goes right through the middle of a library, opera house in this town. And the border is actually, it's a real building, and there's a real black line down the middle of this building. And you can be, I think it's if you're in the audience of the opera house, you're in Canada. If you're on stage, you're in the US. And the same is true of the library. In the reading room, the books are on one side and the tables are on the other or something, and the line is drawn right down the middle. And until 9/11, this was a very fluid place where locals could cross back and forth without any issue. And then since then, of course, the border has been is much more strictly observed, and you can't just cross the street anymore. You can't just pop in and out of the library anymore. But over the years, it was a site of some interesting events that took place. Family members from both sides of the border who maybe couldn't get a visa to cross met each other in the library. There was obviously stories about smuggling that occurred. You'd go to the washroom in the library, drop something off, somebody else would go and pick something up. So there's a number of stories about it. So I thought I could maybe use that as a metaphor for Canada-US relations and have something set there. Now that play has not been produced yet, so
it's available.
It's available, and the community theatre company that's in that town actually has it under consideration. But
cool. I like the descriptor, the two nations separated by a common library.
Yeah.
The one I was actually thinking of was the other side, where it was, you said you were thinking about the Syrian refugee crisis, but you decided to write this play about a white middle-class couple. Describe the border crossing there. Yeah.
Well, that was the first ever 10-minute play that I wrote and had produced. And I think, like everybody's first ever play, it's about people arriving at the pearly gates and not being able to get in for some reason. Everybody writes a play about getting into heaven. It's a really common trope, and I fell into that as well. But it has been.
But this is a different spin on it, though. I don't think I've seen anything like this.
Well, exactly, and if you're going to write something which is a common trope, you have to put a different spin on it. So my idea was that, having watched the Syrian refugee crisis and the terrible conditions that those people were under, was to sort of try and translate that into something that a typical community theatre audience in North America might understand, and say, okay, what if you're a middle-class white couple, what place might you have trouble getting into? And be desperate to get into and not be able to. And so, the obvious answer was getting into heaven. And so I kind of tried to translate some of those same challenges into that scenario, and again have the border guard at the pearly gates be asking this similar kinds of questions, and being very resistant to letting these people in. So that was the setup of it, but it is meant to be a comedy in the end.
Do most of your plays, are most of them comedies?
Probably a majority, probably 2/3. Again, particularly the 10-minute plays. 10-minute festivals are often looking for comedies more than anything else. And so it tends to take my writing in that direction. Although you mentioned a few date plays earlier on, again, 10-minute festivals often have lots of plays about first dates or job interviews, or lots of situations where you have a couple of people and you don't need many props or set pieces.
I don't know very much about playwriting, and so I'm wondering, especially like for one act, short plays, is there an inherent limitation as far as like number of characters goes?
Another very good question in terms on the practicalities of playwriting. So, I mean, in theory, no, but in practice, certainly for shorter plays, a number of places will say maximum 4 characters. They might go to 6 occasionally, but maximum 4. And increasingly, you see those kinds of requests being put in place for longer plays, and even also in independent theatre, professional theatre, they can't afford to pay more than 4 actors, so they're often say, keep the cast small. Community theatre actually is where you're not paying your actors. Maybe one of the last vestiges of large cast plays. Except for Broadway, where they can afford to pay a lot of people, but big budget musicals. But plays like I was saying to Jen earlier on, I'm supposedly in an Agatha Christie play that's been postponed for 2 years now, but that's a cast of 12, and you're not going to get a new play with a cast of 12 produced in many places.
But it's because it's Agatha Christie, people will come to see it, so you can afford to pay the actors.
No, actors don't get paid, but yes.
Okay, so it's a community theater.
It will be a decent audience, yeah. So people like Agatha.
Yes, they do. Enduring. Do you write like towards the competitions, or just kind of like when you hear of a competition, you kind of like go through to see what you have that might be appropriate, or what?
Yeah, generally I just write my own things at my own pace and build up a portfolio of pieces, and then when competitions come up, if they have any kinds of theme or guidance, I'll see if anything from my portfolio can fit or can be made to fit without much modification. I think maybe only once I've actually written something specifically for a competition where you've got to produce something relatively quickly. Something that was done in New York last year, where they gave you seven words as a prompt, and you had to write something within 10 days.
Is that common for competitions to like have a certain angle that they want you to take, or or a theme or something?
Yeah, it might be maybe half of them might give you a theme, although they're usually very, very loose themes that you can make many different things fit them. It's rare that they're really, really specific, but there are some that are very specific in terms of theme, and either you have something or you don't, or you're willing to write something for that.
Do you think that your experience as an actor has, well, I'm sure that it has helped you as a playwright, but has it also had some that caused some difficulties as far as like, you tend towards the things that you like to act rather than like something broader or something more challenging that for you personally?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's helped and it's hindered. So I'll start with helped in
Okay.
that I mean, I'm constantly reading my own stuff out loud, and it's trying to make, particularly again for shorter plays, every line has to be punchy and every line has to count. And so, if I can't say the line myself, probably means that somebody else can't say it. If it seems as though there's an extra word or 2 extra syllables in there when I say it out loud, then it gives me a prompt to look for a different sentence structure or something. So that's definitely helpful before I then ask maybe friends to also read it out loud, which is very helpful. Hindering, I mean, I would say that I come from a community theatre background, not a professional theatre background. I've never had any ambition for theatre to be a career of mine. It's just a very, very serious hobby. And so I tend to write very traditional stuff. I don't write political stuff, or overtly political stuff. I mean, there's usually maybe a message here and there, some undercurrent, but it's not overtly political, which means that my stuff doesn't appeal to a number of places that are looking for things of a different kind. But I am who I am, and I have the background I have. So I would say it does force me into a certain category of venues. So yeah, if that's which it limits me a little bit, but I'm comfortable where I am.
In a way that you don't mind.
No.
But does your background as a scientist, and especially since you're dealing with environmental concerns, does that inform? You don't write overtly, because science has become very political these days, unfortunately. Do you try to avoid stuff like that, or is it just like you've done with the Syrian refugee crisis? You've repackaged it. Do you try to do something like that with like environmental concerns?
And there are a number of competitions and festivals that specifically focus on environmental related material or scientific material out there, and I've yet to submit anything to those so far, but I have recently worked on a couple of full-length plays that might fit the science, the general science umbrella, and I can relate one story to you that may be a bit instructive to people. So I finished a play last year, a full-length play that was about a scientist from Sweden. He was a real person who died in the 1960s, and he'd done some work back in the 20s related to some novel energy source that intrigued me. It was related to a concept called cold fusion, which some of you might have heard about. It reared its head again in the 80s, and then it became discredited. But he'd done some very early work in the 20s on this. And so I tried to base a play on him and have it biographically accurate about him until the Second World War, and then had it go off in a completely fictional direction in terms of his interaction with the Nazi regime, and maybe they were trying to use his energy source to help them since they couldn't get oil from Russia and stuff like that. And that's completely fictional, but maintained him as a character. So historical fiction, if you like, and science related. And there was a limited amount of biographical material I could find for him. The usual places, Google, Wikipedia, that was in English. And I made the either honorable decision or mistake to contact his family to see if they could give me more biographical information, because there was a kind of an amateur biography that was written about him, but it was only available in Swedish. So I contacted his family to see if there was an English version, or if they could send me an electronic version that I could pay to have translated. And eventually I got in touch with his nephew, who said, sure, will you send me a draft of the play? So I did. And they wrote back saying, we do not give you permission to write about our uncle. They didn't like what I'd done, even though I'd made him, for dramatic purposes, he was a hero in the end. You have to make it so that he doesn't appear to be virtuous at some point. Otherwise, it's not a play. They didn't like that. And I chose not to pursue it at that point, even though I'd written a full play and other people who read it really liked it. And I guess the lesson there is, strictly, you don't need their permission. He's dead. You can't libel a dead person. Nevertheless, why create enemies in a nice place like Sweden? So, so I chose to put it aside. Maybe I'll get some other way to reuse it in the future. How the
Just made him totally fictitious. Give him a different name and change a few details.
Yeah, but then you kind of lose the.
Yeah.
How the writers of The Crown get away with it, I have no idea. I guess they have very rich lawyers at Netflix behind them.
And families do still sue for defamation for dead relatives who they feel have been defamed.
Yeah, so but I'm working on something else now, which is, I think the people have been dead long enough, I'm safe now. It's set in 19th century France, so which has a technology aspect to it. So we'll see.
Cool. This is just a reminder to the audience. I know some of you are involved in theater, so if you have particular questions or comments, feel free to jump in. I don't want to dominate. I know it takes a little time to unmute yourself, and we might already be moving on, but don't hesitate to just jump in with your question or comment, okay? So what do you feel is the most challenging part for you? Is it like the actual mechanics of staging? Is it exposition, which can be kind of tricky in a play? Is it dialogue or what?
Not really staging, because so far I have not attempted to self-produce anything that I've written. I mean, that's certainly a direction that a lot of people take, particularly those who are earlier in their career and want to make theatre a profession. They'll self-produce, and that's what fringe festivals are all about, of course. And that's not a direction that I've gone in. My MO has nearly always been anyway to submit to festivals or to artistic directors at theatres that I have some previous contact with. So that's not really an issue for me. I think probably for most writers, my biggest barrier is actually starting. I have ideas, and once I get started, I think I'm relatively prolific. I can produce a lot of words once I get started, but I'm as much as anybody else, I'm a procrastinator about writing that first line of dialogue and getting things moving. Once I do that, I can churn out 5 pages of dialogue in a day, which I think is for a writer is probably pretty good. And I think like all people who write, well, not like all, but like many, I try to get the first draft out relatively quickly and not worry too much about whether it's good or perfect or each line works. Try to get the first draft out quite quickly, and then go back and just go again and again and again, redraft, edit. Bring in new material, go for a long walk, and something will occur to me that I can put back into the play. And so the rewriting part is actually one of my favorite pieces. I don't agonize over redrafting and getting rid of stuff I wrote so carefully the day before. I really enjoy that aspect of it.
You're not afraid to kill your darlings?
No, I'm not. And again, when you mentioned exposition, yeah, I mean, I think probably like most writers, certainly in the first draft, there may be a bit too much of that. And then it's a question of, as long as you recognize it as such, you can, in your redrafts, you can then go back and say, okay, how can I break this paragraph up? How can I reveal it in a more natural way? Can I give it to different characters to say rather than one character spewing a whole page of exposition? Because the challenge, a lot of people write screenplays as well, and obviously for screenplays you can rely on visual elements a lot more than you can in theatre. In theatre you really have to be dialogue focused, so it can be a lot more challenging to get away from exposition in that scenario.
It definitely seems to me to be the trickiest part of playwriting, because if you try to get that exposition in the dialogue, it's kind of stilted. It doesn't sound like what people, they don't tell each other their backgrounds if they know each other.
Yeah, they don't tell each other stuff they already know.
Yes.
The only time I can think where that actually works quite naturally, that I've observed happening a lot in the wild, is couples talking about actually how they met. They'll often do that in a romantic kind of, remember when we met, we had this table and that waiter, oh yes, I remember. And they often will do that. I've noticed real people will do that, but it's quite natural. But in general, no, it's not a good idea.
Yeah. There is a question from Kevin Knott. He says, first, my standard question about advice to young writers. What does he think they should know, and what are good practices to get into?
Well, thank you, Kevin, for suggesting that I'm a young writer. probably wasn't what you were suggesting, but I'll take it. I'll take it.
Advice to young writers.
Advice to young writers. Look at the color of my COVID beard, which I'm shaving off the moment restrictions are over. But
it becomes you.
Oh well, thank you. Advice to young writers, I would say is, well, some of what I've just said actually is, don't worry about the first draft being perfect. Just write whatever you want, and you can always redraft it later, tighten it up later. Is key. Just get your idea out there and figure things out. I think one thing that I found to be very valuable, but it took me a long time to have the confidence to do this. And again, it may have been Frostburg may have been the turning point for me in giving me the confidence, was I was early on quite shy about sharing what I'd written with friends, not necessarily theatre friends, but just social friends, and getting their opinion or having them read it for me so I could hear them read it aloud, because I was really concerned it was terrible. And the last thing I wanted to do was expose terrible stuff to friends and have them think less of me. So but having had a few successes, and say Frostburg being important on that, it gave me some confidence to say, okay, I think probably it's okay at least, and have them read it. And then once I had that confidence, getting theatre friends together to read things out loud and take on those characters and give me their feedback was really valuable. I did also invest a little bit in professional dramaturgy, which again, early in my career, I found to be very, very useful. In that case, it can just be a couple of hours, and they'll give you tools and prompts that you can then apply yourself effectively. So I mean, obviously I was in a fortunate position to have a good career and to be able to afford to pay a dramaturge to take a look. But if you can do that, that's great too. I think 10-minute plays actually, which was they were a relatively new phenomenon, like in the past 10 years or something. But when I came to writing, I found that it was a great way to get in. To say it was less intimidating. You can crank out a 10-minute play quite quickly and get into the game quite quickly, and worry about longer pieces later. I found that to be really useful. You're not going to make any money from 10-minute plays, but it can be a good discipline for when you come to write longer pieces.
You don't feel like once you've gotten to the 10-minute point, it's like, but I have so much more to say.
Well, yeah, and it's not unusual for 10-minute plays to become the first scene of a longer piece. I've seen that happen. I mean, the piece I read for you, that was consciously the case, but in many other cases, it has been unconscious. I think for other writers, is that 10-minute play will become something bigger. It's a bigger idea, certainly.
Especially if it's a good idea, and it's got more potential.
If it has legs. I mean, some ideas 10 minutes is about all they can sustain, but maybe the other things can grow.
Guy, you mentioned earlier that you were reluctant to write about the pandemic, but then you ended up writing something about pandemics, but set into the future.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other things that you've been reluctant about? And if you wrote about them, what made you make the choice to write about them?
And I have just written a second pandemic play, but again, it's set 30 years in the future. So I just going back to one of Nina's earlier questions, just a little sidebar there. The inspiration behind that was I just read an article in an online newspaper about one of the big art house directors from Europe. I forget who it was now. Was doing a new movie documentary about the Japanese soldiers who emerged from the jungles in the Philippines in the 1970s, thinking the war was still on or refusing to surrender. And so I thought about maybe pandemic holdouts 30 years from now, and how you might persuade them to come out of their front door. So that was the second pandemic play that I've written. Other things that as I said earlier, I've kind of in some senses deliberately avoided writing overtly political stuff, partly because that I have my identity, right, and there's only some things that I can reasonably write about with my experience, and so I steered away from those kinds of things. I tried a little bit with the play we talked about earlier, the one set in the library with the US-Canada border right down the middle of it, to introduce something a bit more overtly political, to an extent that I felt I was able to do reasonably, in that we have, in that play, we have a white American and a white Canadian sitting on both sides of the library, and they're trading things back and forth, verbally and then literally trading objects back and forth across the border, and doing that quite freely. And then at the end of the play, the final couple of pages, we have a mother and son who are not white. The mother is on the US side, the son's on the Canadian side, and they can't. There's something that's preventing the son from returning back to visit his mother in the US, and they have this sort of moment where they actually just touch each other, and all alarms go off, and the security guards come charging in, and it's kind of an attempt to show how people of color may be treated differently by the authorities than the white people who were there for the first 7 pages. So that's my attempt perhaps to address that kind of issue, but that's about as far as I feel I'm qualified to go. Any other things I've deliberately not written about so far? I did try writing a play once in verse. It hasn't been produced, so maybe that's something I should stay away from.
Well, your Last Rites was the play that the most recent play that you did with us, not the first one, and then also the one that did so well in the Canadian one-act play competition. And it strikes me as a political play, right? Even though it is subtle. And I'm wondering why, like, what propelled you to write about that situation of the person on death row and the priest, right? If you could maybe talk about that a bit.
Yeah, sure. And clearly in that play, I'm not blind to the fact that you certainly could cast those parts with particular ethnicities and amp up some of those aspects to it as well. The idea for that play again came from a very different place. I had this idea that you would one of my oldest friend, one of my best friends back in England, he is a family doctor. And I just had this idea that you'd have a patient come in to see the doctor, and the patient would have, some complaint, and it would get turned around, and rather than the doctor solving the patient's complaint, the doctor would have some issue and the patient would solve the doctor's issue. And so that's kind of where it started. And then it translated into this idea of a priest coming to visit the prisoner, and it being, the priest there to get the prisoner's confession before they go to execution, and then but it turning around and having the prisoner also get the priest's confession. So that's kind of where it came from. But I deliberately didn't want to make it mostly about the priest. There's been lots of stuff that's been done about Catholic priests and their transgressions. So I didn't want to make that the main theme, but I did want to have that switch of power go on between them, back and forth. So that's kind of where it came from. Yeah, and you could certainly leave it up to the creative team to make it maybe more or less political.
Has your community theater group done any of the plays that you have written?
No, not yet. Well, wait a minute, I'll back up a second. The main one that I act with is Ottawa Little Theatre, which has been around for over 100 years. And outside of pandemics, they do nine full-length plays a year, 14 nights per play, with 300 people in the audience every night. So it's very popular, but it's very popular because they do very traditional plays that are well known. They just, in the current season, they are doing a full-length play that was written by one of the theatre community here, but it has been produced a few times elsewhere. So I'm certainly hoping to get onto their radar screen, perhaps for the future. But one of my 10-minute plays, three of my 10-minute plays have been done by other community theatre groups within an hour's drive of Ottawa, and that was achieved through direct connection with the AD, not through competition. So I've started to do a bit more of that direct reaching out.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That'd be really fun. I think to act in your own play, wouldn't it?
I don't think I'd want to do that.
No?
Maybe I'll mention it before I forget. The other thing that I've had as an experience of doing something a bit different for the past few months has been radio plays. There was one competition I entered, and also then in another case I contacted the AD of a group about a 3-hour drive from here, who were doing radio plays, and were able to find some of my 10-minute plays that could be converted into radio plays. And I have never written anything overtly for the radio, but that was an interesting process to do that conversion. And
you have even more restrictions with radio plays.
Absolutely. You can't have on a stage play, you can have a character go, "Ah!" But on the radio, you have to say, "Put that gun down, Michael." So you've got to think about that a lot more. But you do have sound effects, which are cute. And so the first one of those has been produced and broadcast. That was in England, which was interesting. They also wanted me to insert into that script 6 local references to the city where the radio was being broadcast from. And so, that was a city I've been to once 30 years ago in the dark. So, thank goodness for Google Street View.
So it did get produced then?
It did, okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, maybe back to Jennifer's question. Things I've avoided writing about until recently. I did avoid writing anything that was specifically for Zoom. There were plays of mine that have been adapted to Zoom, but they weren't specifically written for Zoom. But then finally, last year, I mentioned earlier, there was this thing I did that was produced through a group in New York, based on some specific prompts, and that was done specifically for Zoom. So I do have one play eventually that I did write for that. So how long the Zoom version will continue to be relevant, who knows? But maybe it can be converted into a stage play at some point.
So it's written for Zoom in that you have like all your little tiles with the different actors doing their lines. That sort of, that's specifically what it is, not using Zoom as the device that drives the plot.
Right. Yeah. The former. It's in fact, it's just a two-hander, and it's an online, a virtual book club meeting where only two people show up.
Neither of which have read the book.
You're ahead of me.
So all they do is drink wine.
That's certainly part of it.
Yeah, I have been in book clubs where that's basically what it devolved into.
They're really just drinking clubs with
Yes.
reading on the side.
Well, I read the first few pages. Okay, other questions from the audience? Or anything you want to ask us, Guy?
Well, I did ask Jen whether you did produce the festival in 2021, and I got that answer earlier. So I look forward to maybe participating again in the future. I'm just wondering whether you locally do other theatre productions or festivals beyond the one-act festival that you've done.
As far as I know, in Frostburg, the one-act play is the only thing, but Cumberland has a couple theaters. The Embassy and the Cumberland Theater, is that what they are? The Cumberland
Theater.
Yeah, Cumberland Theater. So Heidi, do you participate in those?
And actually, I mentioned, Jen, I'm not sure if you knew about this, but the Embassy Theatre in Cumberland is now apparently going to stage both my one acts in June, back to back.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
I'm really looking forward to that happening. Which it's a nice bridge, right, between the Embassy and between the Center for Literary Arts. I was just going to say quickly, so the one act play competition and festival is the only one act play or kind of drama focused thing that we do in the Center for Literary Arts, though I did write a creative placemaking grant a couple of years ago for pop-up theater at like local farmers markets. And unfortunately that wasn't funded, but it's an idea that kind of remains in the back of my head, that I keep thinking that would be a good opportunity for us to kind of branch out into more.
They asked me a question, but I couldn't answer because my phone.
Oh, yeah, please, Heidi, hop in.
Yes, you can hear me. Okay, well, so actually my phone is completely blank. I have no idea why it's unmuted, but technology. So anyway, what I was telling Kevin that because he just re-entered with the dogs. What was the question that you had?
Whether you participated in either the Embassy Theater or the Cumberland Theater.
I have, but was the question specifically about contests or was it just about local theater groups?
Local theater groups, yeah, but you can expand on anything you want.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple others at one point. We obviously have Acting Out for Good, which does charity, but they do mostly like mainstream musicals and stuff. Then I've had some contacts with a couple of people who I think would like to still try some other community theater. So there are, I think, other options in the area that are developing again. We've also done some stuff that is independent, like through the Arts Council, like on holidays and stuff. And I was going to say earlier that, Guy, if you write a specific radio play, we can totally produce it. Chuck Dickin used to, over at WFWM, used to record for when I used to do with another theater company, Front and Center. We did radio plays every year, and I love producing radio plays. So I'm sure that Jen would be happy to help us produce a radio play if you get that going.
Okay, I've got something for you.
Did you enjoy doing that, Guy?
Yeah, although I hadn't done it voluntarily until I was prompted to do it. It does open up a whole nother avenue. I think there seems to be a resurgence in radio plays. Maybe it's pandemic driven, but maybe it'll stick around later. Radio plays or podcast plays, which are very, very similar, whether you have anyone reading stage directions or not. But yeah, I think it's one other way to get stuff out there.
I think there is sort of a nostalgic thing, coming. I think that's one of the reasons for the rise of radio plays again. Just there's a sort of nostalgia to it, with the different sound effects, and just makes you feel a certain way. And maybe that's something that we like during the pandemic. It gets us out of the present.
Yeah, and I think although traditional radio plays may not be that common, everyone's listening to podcasts now, which are pretty much the same thing. So maybe it's just reframing what we call radio plays into something else, which is very popular.
Yeah. Most of the podcasts that I listen to, though, are more like either two hosts talking to each other, or somebody talking about an area of expertise, or investigative reporting. So I haven't really heard many podcasts that are actually plays. So you're aware of some of those?
Yeah, there are several groups that have podcast series up there.
Huh. Can you put them in the chat or something like that, so we can check them out if they're at the top of your?
Well, there's two names that are on top of my head. There's the Ensemble Theatre of Chattanooga has a series. One of my plays was done there. Panglossian Theatre. Do you know them? They're relatively close to you, actually. Williamsburg, is that near you?
I'm writing this down.
Panglossian Theatre does one, and there's one from the UK called Painkiller. So those are three off the top of my head.
Okay. So play podcasts. Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And some of them are fully produced, and some of them are more just like readings, but it's all good stuff.
Kind of like the readings that we do for the second and third place winners for the Frostburg one act. That sort of thing. Yeah,
it would be similar to that. Yeah, and I think it's also been certainly during the pandemic, these kinds of things have been very nice to offer to actors as well, who want to do something but they can't do conventional plays. So giving them radio plays or readings to do is a fun activity for them, as well as useful to the writers. Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, when it comes time to stage one of your plays, do you find yourself having to rewrite things, or have you done enough previous readings with your actor friends to get it all down?
Well, so like I said, I don't self-produce, but for when other groups do something, it's been pretty rare that other groups have contacted me and said, can they change this? Would this work better? Only once or twice, and I'm certainly completely hands off unless they want me to participate. I see my role as providing them with the material, and then they can be as creative as they want afterwards. So certainly with the radio plays, there's definitely several back and forth there to make those changes. But for things which are stage plays, I think only once or twice have I been contacted and asked to consider doing something differently. And there's always has been a straightforward accommodation that worked both ways. I'm certainly not precious about that. I'm happy to consider modifying things.
You're not a diva.
None of the requests so far have changed the fundamental context or message of the play, so it's relatively straightforward. And some of the things are language related as well. Words that are common in Canada don't work in the US or don't work in the UK or whatever, so minor things like that.
Not changing the main character to a lizard or something like that.
No,
Would you mind that?
Well, I'd be open to suggestions. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's you've got to be flexible with casting these days. So,
do you copyright your plays?
Well, not explicitly. I think they copyright kind of by default anyway, aren't they? But
yeah, kind of like with most writing. Yeah,
I don't specifically put copyright notices on my plays. And the drama guilds won't be happy with me for saying this, and I am a member of the Playwrights Guild of Canada. I'm not in this to make money. So in terms of making sure that copyrights are on there to ensure royalty flows and that kind of thing, that at this point doesn't bother me so much either.
All right.
Okay, this is a little shift, but you mentioned that you have a play about to be produced in Florida. Where in Florida? What's the theater company? Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's the Playwrights Roundtable, and I think they're in Orlando, and they have a festival in June, which they're planning to produce that play in. And I think Florida's been pretty open throughout the pandemic anyway, so I would expect that will be going ahead. So that was, that's that group, and that'll be the first production of that particular play. For those who aren't that familiar with writing plays and entering them into competitions, the competitions have all kinds of different rules. Every competition has its own rules. Some will take plays that have been previously produced. Some won't. They have to be premieres. There's always restrictions on number of actors, as we talked about earlier. Different themes. There's often restrictions geographically, or restrictions based on the identity of the playwright. The rules are different. So you've got to be very careful whenever you read. Don't automatically assume that something you entered in one place can be done somewhere else.
What's your favorite part of writing?
Well, I probably hinted it earlier. I think it's actually rewriting.
Although you did mention that, yes.
It's the moment of finishing a first draft, whether it be 8 pages or 80 pages, but you've got to a first draft. And I in terms of writing style, I'm pretty linear. I generally have an idea of where I think it's going. I have a basic framework, and I'll typically go from beginning to end. And if an idea occurs to me while I'm writing that's better suited to later on, I just make a little note of it and sort of put it down the page, and eventually I'll incorporate it. But when I get to the end of that first linear go through, that's a really nice moment. I'll give myself a couple of days to breathe, and then I enjoy really going through it. The full length that I'm writing at the moment, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is a historical fiction set in 19th century France. It was a new activity for me to be doing research before even beginning to write, which I enjoyed doing. Research is also, you've got to be careful that research doesn't become an excuse to procrastinate, because you can research forever. But I enjoyed doing some research anyway, and I had to order a book from Abe Books that was out of print, and read through that and some of the material. So that was fun to do that, and actually discovering some connections between these historical characters kind of by accident that made it play more interesting than I thought it might be. So we'll see.
What gave you the idea to do that play?
So again, this was a random thing that I read somewhere else. I wasn't thinking about theatre at all. I think it was a podcast actually from, I think it was The Economist magazine's podcast, and they were talking about the very first technology hack in history, which happened in 1834 in France. And I'm going to tell you the whole story of the play now. 1834 in France. Where France had this system of mechanical semaphores to get messages across the country. So they were big towers with arms on them that made semaphore signals, and with a telescope you could see from one tower to the next. So every 5 to 10 miles on a hilltop you'd have one of these towers, and that meant you could get a message from Paris to Marseille in about 3 or 4 hours rather than 3 or 4 days, because it would have been a horse rider. We'd have to transmit the message previously. And it was used for government business, government interaction. And these twin brothers, they got the idea that the stock market, where they were located in Bordeaux, always followed in lockstep with the stock market in Paris, but it would always be 3 days behind. So they figured out that if they could hack into this semaphore signal that was otherwise sending a message for some other reason, and put in one extra symbol that people would just assume was a typo, essentially, but meant something to them, they could sort of see into the future. They'd be 3 days in advance of the stock market movement and could place their bets and make a fortune. And they did.
Wow.
And they, and again, a mirror of today. Eventually, they were found out, but because the technology was so new, there were no laws against doing what they did, and so they largely got away with it. And then the historical accident that I discovered just through Wikipedia was that later in life, one of these twin brothers ended up running the casino in Monte Carlo. It was the only legal casino in Europe. It was the Las Vegas of its time in the 1870s. And then he was then cheated out of a fortune because someone came and figured out the roulette wheels could be figured out. Roulette wheels had little biases to them that you could observe and place your bets and get an edge on the house. And so he lost a whole bunch of money to some other guy who did this thing. So anyway, that's some of the plot.
Interesting. I don't know if you call it karma or poetic justice, but
well,
or just what goes around comes around.
There's one more piece of karma to that, which is the guy who figured out the roulette wheels made a fortune, an English guy, distant relation of Mick Jagger, actually, Joseph Jagger. He then got defrauded himself by a stock market scam and lost most of his money. So, the 19th century was a fun time.
Oh man, sounds like it.
So just to say that ideas come from the strangest places, and you just got to be alert to them.
So that sounds like a really interesting story. Are there challenges actually making that into a play?
Yes, yeah, really good question. Because I'm not writing a documentary. One thing I've been doing over the pandemic actually is I've been mentoring some other first-time playwrights in the local theatre groups here who are writing their very first 10-minute plays. And although have no formal qualifications, I have had some experience, so I've been helping them. And that's one of the lessons I try to get to them is you're writing a play, not a documentary, so it has to have a beginning, a middle, and end. It has to have conflict. It can't just be people talking about events in history. It can't just be people agreeing and telling jokes to each other. There has to be some conflict. They have to disagree before they agree in the end. And so, yeah, in this case, you have to find the drama in the historical facts, which is what historical fiction's about. It's the first time I've really tried to do historical fiction. So of course, none of the conversations that I'm putting on paper, or on virtual paper, ever took place. I'm inventing all those conversations, just like all the conversations in The Crown never took place. Spoiler alert. No, they were never recorded verbatim. So yes, you have to find the drama, and certainly some of the characteristics I'm giving to the characters, they did not have. So I create some conflict between these two twin brothers. Whether they actually had any conflict, who knows? But for dramatic purposes, I'm imagining that one of the twin brothers was keener on this fraud than the other one was. And similarly, in the Monte Carlo part, the strong woman who ran Monte Carlo, Monaco at the time, was Queen Caroline. She was, although her husband and her son were the notional figureheads, the notional rulers, she was actually the one, the figure behind that, who ran the whole thing. She was the really smart person, businesswoman, actress originally before she married into the family, like Grace Kelly, I guess.
Yeah, I was thinking of her.
It's a tradition. So she's a very strong character, and she then sort of takes over and is being really tough on the guy running the casino who's losing all the money. Again, those conversations probably never took place, but you have to, create them with the framework of the basic historical facts.
And is there some through line that you're trying to get across, which is like people who are greedy or people who like to take risks or something like that?
Crime doesn't pay.
Crime doesn't pay. Crime does pay until it doesn't.
Well, I think the basic idea was to give some kind of mirror to the current issues that we have with technology. So, we have similar things happening. So the roulette wheel being slightly biased is a technology issue. It's an engineering issue. And we have, scientific questions happening all the time at the moment, where if you read the science one way or the other, you can gain a benefit or not. And I mentioned earlier that the semaphores, they were the internet of their day, and they could be hacked. So there is this meant to be this idea that you can reflect on what happened 100
kind of interesting how, sorry.
And see it reflected today, and then underlying that is the fact that these are crimes and they're getting away with them or not. Although the roulette wheel is not a crime, you just observed a bias and acted upon it. Different paths that people take. So the idea of these twins, one was being very risk averse, one was very interested in risk and making fast money, trying to get that balance. And there's some religious conflict, because the casino, the guy running the casino who did the scam at the beginning, he's French, he's Catholic. The Englishman who took his money was a Methodist, so that you can have some contrast there between their outlooks on life and the hereafter. So trying to work in a number of different themes.
There is something interesting about, well, it seems like every time there's a new technology, there's this unwarranted optimism about all its good aspects. And it seems like every time that its weak underbelly is exposed, it comes as such a surprise.
Yeah.
Whereas, just showing how in the past, and these things repeat themselves over and over again. So it seems like your play should provoke those sorts of conclusions in the present day that, we need to be aware of. Every new thing has its weaknesses as well as its strengths. And it seems like we never learn that.
Yeah, and typically the inventors and the promoters only ever see the upside, and they can't even imagine that there's something in there that somebody else could exploit. But eventually somebody's going to find a crack, and then we have to scramble to paper over it. But yeah, that's you're right. That does seem to be a common theme.
We never learn.
And of course, until somebody noticed the bias in the roulette wheel, they were raking in the money from all of those waiting punters, and then until they weren't.
Are there more questions from the audience, or is it time to get donuts?
I'm sorry that I can't send donuts across the...
I'm sorry too. We'll have to get Guy back to Frostburg. Make sure we get some Lorenzo's donuts.
Well, I'd love to. If everything goes fantastically well and international travel becomes really, really easy again, I'd love to come down in June and see what Embassy does with my one act and hook up a bit, do a bit more while I'm down there. Perhaps that would be fantastic. And
yeah, I would love that. And I'm hoping that this Omicron, which seems to be winding down, is like the last of the things that shut things down. Because we'll probably have COVID with us forever in some form or other, but hopefully not as deadly as it's been.
And I understand.
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. Guy, can you remind me about the festival that's happening of yours in Florida? Or if you know the dates, I'm going to be down there for a couple weeks. And if I was in Orlando at the same time, I would.
Yeah, it's Playwrights Roundtable is the group. And I think it's in June sometime. But I'm not sure the exact.
I'll look it
date.
up. That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can look it up, yeah.
That'd be cool.
In the meantime, if you want to use any of my stuff for teaching or readings locally, that's perfectly fine. Just let me know. I'm happy to help out.
Thanks.
And
I really enjoyed reading the descriptions. Yes.
The football team did really well this year. I noticed that on the website. They tied for the title, I see. So well done them.
Go Bobcats.
Go Bobcats.
I guess we have to say that now, right? I'm not a football enthusiast, so thanks for letting me know. Well, thank you very much for doing this little coffee with us, or with our at-home coffee.
Mhm.
And I look forward to seeing you in real life.
Well, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks, Nina.
You bet.
Thanks, Jen, for inviting me.
Thanks, Jen, for setting it up.
I am so happy to have